Hi, everyone, and welcome to our next session of ASPM Nation. I'm Karina Furdy, Director of Marketing at Psycode, and I'll be your host for this next panel. I have the pleasure of welcoming two security heavyweights for our discussion today on leadership lessons, from product security to the CISO office. So, Helen, Andy, welcome. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So let me set the scene on Helen and Andy. They both have such an impressive track record that makes them incredibly qualified to speak on this topic today. Helen, you are the Cybersecurity Executive Advisor at Cisco with an amazing career under your belt, including CISO at the Ohio State University. And you also literally wrote the book on cybersecurity careers, navigating the cybersecurity career path. So thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Andy, you were also in your post CISO phase as partner at Wild Ventures after an impressive career as Chief Security Officer at Akamai. I also cannot leave out that you've written an amazing book, 1% Leadership, that's inspired a lot of the topics of this panel today. So welcome, Andy.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
And both of you, of course, collaborated with us at Psycode on our book, Code Resilience in the Age of ASPM. So a lot of shared work here today. It's very exciting to be kicking this off. So we'll just dive straight in. So you both have a rare mix of experience in both product security and excelling in CISO roles. How has that unique combination shaped your approach to security leadership? Andy, I'd love to start with you.
Well, I think in the security field, we talk a lot about like business enablement and being aligned with the business. And when you work in product security, you functionally start aligned with the business. Your job is to build and ship safe products. And when you're outside product security, but trying to help in the product security world, you sometimes forget that your job is to ship. But when you're really working on product security, you learn like not shipping a product is sometimes worse than shipping a product that isn't perfect. And that really helps you understand how to make trade-offs that will apply all across the CISO world.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good start. Helen, how about you? From your perspective, how has that combination shaped your approach to security leadership?
It's a really great question. One of the things as an industry that we sort of aren't very good at is definitions. And when you think about the CISO role, there's the enterprise CISO, there's the business aligned CISO, there's the product CISO, there's you get the idea. I've been an quote unquote enterprise CISO and I've been a quote unquote product CISO. And in every conversation, you're doing this dance of who's on first, what's the role, who's really in charge of this particular security problem. And so what it's taught me is how to navigate organizations that get bigger over time, where the roles and responsibilities around product security, but also around enterprise security, have to change as an organization grows too. So it's been an interesting journey, and I'm not sure I've got it right yet, to be honest, but we'll see.
I think you've touched on a lot of some of these topics as well in what you've just shared, but I think there will be many AppSec and product security leaders in the audience today. What's your advice to those setting themselves on a leadership or a CISO path? Helen, we can stick with you and then move to Andy.
Yeah. I say this to anybody I'm mentoring in any role, but you've got to begin by networking. There's certainly a role to play in terms of your technical competencies and all of those things. And certainly in a product security role, I think there's a heavier emphasis on technical excellence, perhaps, than in other kinds of CISO roles. But regardless, networking is the way to start. And so, networking in the company you're already in terms of working with the product security teams, working with the enterprise security teams, understanding how they all fit together, but also networking outside the company and understanding what other companies are doing in this space, because we're all still learning on the job. And so having a network that goes beyond the borders of your immediate company gives you the opportunity to maybe bring in good ideas into the company you're in, makes you look like a rock star, and will help propel your career upwards, whether that's upwards within the company you're in or upwards in some other company. So networking is the place to start every time.
Fantastic. Really, really good advice. Andy, what's your take?
A big piece of that networking has to be being seen to listen. All too often, security professionals walk into a room, they think they have an answer, they have some edict they're trying to push through, and they're not listening to the incentives of everybody else in the room. I can recall working with a product manager whose literal incentive was they got their quarterly bonus if their product shipped on time. That was it. They had to release a product with a known name and version number within the quarter, or they lost money. And so when we were trying to make their product better, any slip was unacceptable. But moving a feature out of that release to a later one was fine. And so once you started to learn, oh, this is their incentive, and if I help them get their money, they'll do almost anything that I'm going to ask for as long as it's within reason. So start to listen to what people are demanding, what they're asking for. If you can ask a question on behalf of a non-security person before they get a chance to, they're going to be like, "Oh, this person listens. They're business aligned." All you're doing is you're repeating the same question they have asked in every single meeting you've ever been in. You hear the person from technical support is always says like, "What's the cost in professional services hours?" Ask that question once, and all of a sudden, professional services will start saying, "Oh, there's security implications here we also need to deal with." Like, build the network by using your energy to advocate for other stakeholders, and they'll return that favor tenfold.
Yeah, I think it's a really fantastic point. How do you understand, the incentives and drivers of others that you're working with in order to, help be a better partner? Which brings me on to the next question. There are three big themes that I want to talk about today. The first is, how do you bridge security and connect it with business growth? So we all know it's critical for security to be business enabling. Andy, you've already started talking about that, but how do you talk about security internally so that people will truly listen? So yeah, Andy, we can stay with you.
Yeah. So language is really important, and often we get it wrong. And I like using the word risk as an example. Like, risk is this aggregate thing, but people use it to talk as a noun. It's like we have a risk over here. And what you'll discover is like the CFO hears that word very differently than a product leader who hears it very differently than the security professional. And so the most important thing is to understand what biases people bring with language, decide what battles you want to pick. Maybe the right thing to do is stop using a word that everybody has loaded and use something different. I'm a huge fan of the term hazard. Like, let's talk about a hazard in a business. And almost everybody agrees with what hazard means, except general counsel, because to them, a hazard is something you do board reporting level. It's like a much bigger thing. But with the technical folks, it doesn't have any baggage. Like, vulnerability has baggage, and these things all have baggage. So pick language that will resonate with your audience, adjust if you need to, use their language if you have to. But the important thing is you can't be seen to be like, "Oh, we sit in an ivory tower and we use our language and we insist that you use ours," and stop misusing our words.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Helen, I know, we've spoken in the past about this, and I think you've written on it as well. How are you bridging the gap between security and non-security teams?
Yeah.
And to Andy's point, how are you, making sure you're communicating and framing and positioning security in that way to be a clear enabler?
Yeah. So Andy's already touched on it a little bit. You definitely need to understand the motivations of the people that you're working with, the business side, the tech side, your vendor side, all, anyone you're coming into contact with. Having some EQ around what they care about is super important. What I'd add to that is nobody cares about security for security's sake except security people. So I wouldn't suggest that you go in and you say how complicated this is from a security perspective, and they don't care. They want you to be a duck on water. All they want to see is this gliding duck. The fact that you're paddling your feet off underneath the water level, they don't care. So tell stories that talk about the outcomes you're trying to achieve with the things that you're asking them to do, and tell stories that are going to make them want to live that story. So, again, understanding what they care about, but then saying, I'm coming to you with this challenge or opportunity, pick your language. And if we do this right, then we're going to be able to, I don't know, hit our sales bonus. We're going to be able to hit our financial numbers. We're going to be able to look really technically brilliant at the next cybersecurity conference where we talk about what we've done. Tell a story, and that's going to bridge between the weirdness and the complexity of the security world and the business who are just trying to not care about security.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's spot on there. And how do you balance thinking strategically but also acting tactically as a leader? I think security is it's a very complex and at times operational space. So what's that tension and balance mean to both of you? Andy, we can start with you.
I think one of the challenges people often have is they want to lay out a roadmap and stick to it. And first of all, your business is agile. They're moving faster than your roadmap can adjust. The technologies are, being deprecated, being replaced. You should have a vision for where you want to be. And you should have one that's 10 years out, 5 years out, like each of these things. And then you adapt flexibly. Right. I consider, when Akamai implemented zero trust, we started right after the, Operation Aurora, where we were breached. And we said, here's where we want to be in 10 years. I will tell you that the technologies we had in mind, almost none of them survived that 10-year journey. But we were flexible, we were adaptable. We implemented 8021X on wired networks, which is pretty crazy to do. But the infrastructure we built to do it put X509 certificates on every single device. So when we went to, we want to do passwordless login, we already had X509 everywhere. We added Duo. And it's like, boom, we went passwordless. Our employees loved us, but we had not envisioned that at the start of our 10-year journey. That came in much, much later. So be flexible and adaptable tactically, put in place all the building blocks you might need and then some, and then you can pick the right solution as the opportunity shows up. But you have a vision of where you're going to be and who you'll be at the end of it, but you don't have to commit to a technology roadmap.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. So present, the roadmap clearly, but be agile and adaptable as you go. And now the second big theme I want to bring us onto is, we've already spoken about communication, but what is the importance of that communication for kind of building partnerships and trust? Helen, you've written about transparency being kind of non-optional, whether it's in, the threat assessments that you're running or implementation plans. What do you mean by transparency being non-optional, and what are your top communication principles?
Yeah. Uh, I think doing security is hard. It's hard for security people, but it's hard for non-security people to try and do security things. And so when I talk about transparency, I talk about recognizing that fact that it is complicated. But to be able to be transparent about what's working, what's not working, why it's working, and building on that, why it's not working, and letting things change as a result, to Andy's point, getting flexible around the things you need to get flexible on, right? So, transparency to me is a way of communicating, but the purpose of being transparent is to build trust. Because if you show up as a security person and just berate your partners for not doing security well, they're going to tune you out. They're going to not want to talk to you. They're going to push you aside. But showing up and saying, and having a little humility and saying, look, I don't know your job as well as you know your job, but here are some things I think could work for us to make your job better and to make security better. Let's talk about those things. Let's be that way. So the whole point of being a security leader, regardless of the title you hold or how many employees you have directly reporting to you, the purpose of being a security leader is to build trust and have your company and your team be trustworthy. So transparency to me is the core value that drives everything that stems into that.
Yeah, Andy, I can see you nodding a lot. Anything to add there?
It's so important. Like, oftentimes security professionals like, oh, I know all the risks, but I can't tell anybody because that would like expose the company. First of all, almost everybody else knows what the risks are. Like there might be very specific things like, oh, here's a specific like packet of death that will take out our system. Sure. Hold that one close to your vest. Only the people working on it need to know. But if you're like, oh, we're exposed to this massive risk, you should be talking about that with everybody involved. You might be wrong and they'll correct you, but if you're right, they need to believe in a risk. Humans love to take risks. That's literally what we do. The less transparency you have, the more risk the organization takes without people being aware of it. What you're trying to do is align how much risk you believe you have with how much you actually have. And you can't do that without transparency.
And when it comes to application security, then it's especially of all areas in security, it's an incredibly complex area. It's highly technical. When we're thinking about communication and building trust and partnerships, what's the danger here in how we present application security, whether it's data, the results, the impact?
I mean, I would just start at the high level of don't let yourself get nerd sniped. This is a place where it's so easy to get like lost in the weeds of, oh, this is the coolest vulnerability ever. Like if you cannot explain a software defect type in 30 seconds or less to an executive, you should not be talking about it. Like that should just be your rule. You should be able to, everybody should know what an injection attack is. And so you've taught them injection. You're like, oh, this is a type of injection attack. And now here's the business outcome. But if you
Yeah,
walk in and you're like, oh, let me tell you the cool details of this amazing vulnerability, what the executives will see is a technologist in the room. They will not see an
yeah,
executive in the room.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Helen, anything to add?
Yeah, I'm going to do a little bit of systems management here. I think all the things Andy said in terms of you've got to be able to talk about this to whoever your audience is in a way they're going to understand for sure. But I also
Yeah,
think there's a risk that the security teams tend to take on, which is we talk about all this stuff ourselves. So we think risks are bigger than they actually are. And then we sort of um, we hold the rest of the organization in contempt for not caring about stuff the way we care about stuff. And so I think the other piece to this is you've got to talk often and openly about the risks that you've got to, as Andy said, to be able to right size how you're thinking about things. But I also think it then shares the accountability of doing something about those risks with all of those business partners as well. If only the security people talk about risks and then complain that nobody else cares, well, of course they don't care because you're not talking to them about it. So making sure that we're sharing, we don't show up and say risk is everybody's business and then holding all the risks to ourselves as security people. We need to make sure that it's easy and common to talk about security stuff and people aren't going to get penalized for doing it, that we make it normal to talk about and manage security risks collectively.
yeah, yeah. I think that's completely spot on. And Andy, in your book, 1% Leadership, one of your leadership lessons is around acting faster than your adversaries, but slower than your allies. And, when I was reading that, it's really about the principle of involving key partners in security decision making to build trust and making sure you're building buy-in kind of at their pace. Can you tell us a bit more about this and what do you think the big lessons are there for our audience?
Yeah, I think there's a running joke people like to say, which is you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the slowest one of your friends. It's a great joke. It's an awful leadership strategy. If I convince you to go camping with me and a bear shows up in the woods and I start running, and the first you realize if there's a bear is you see me hightailing into the woods, you're never going camping with me again, right? The important thing here is you want everybody to outrun the bear, and you should be the slowest of your allies. That if I get you involved in a project and times change, we're going to shift what we're doing, even if I've already decided that we're going to kill this project, you have to be part of that decision making process. I have to connect with you and say, hey, here's what's changing. If the first time you hear about it is we're at some prioritization meeting and I say, yeah, that's no longer important, so I'm not working on it. And you're sitting here going, I've got 3 people working on that project. And now like I'm in front of my boss trying to justify why my 3 people are working on a project that the head of security just said is unimportant. You're never going to associate people with my project again. And that's what's really important. People have to trust that you will not leave them hanging.
Yeah, yeah. And also, when there are inevitable shifts and changes in direction, they need to be brought along in that and,
Yep.
almost feel like they've made that decision with you, not the decision is being
Right.
made
And that
to
you're going
them.
to help them. Yeah. You're going to help them get up and get running and do whatever it is, even at the expense of your own organization. And then they're
Yeah.
going to see that vulnerability and be like, oh, I trust you. I'll come along with you on another journey. Maybe we'll camp somewhere with fewer bears.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the third theme to bring us on to next, people, process, and technology. It's the trio that the industry talks a lot about already. Helen, specifically, you've written about addressing people, process, and technology in that order. I'd love to hear from you. What is it about making sure you do it in that sequence, and just tell us a bit more about the lesson there.
Sure. So the reality is that cybersecurity isn't about the technology. It's not about the attacks. It's about the culture of the organization and how the culture of the organization thinks about technology risk. So when the board comes in and says, this is our risk appetite, and hopefully the board does say that, sometimes it doesn't, then the organization can work to say, well, how do we deliver our products and our services according to that measurement of technology risk? So that is a culture question. It's a people question. It is about how much risk we're willing to take. It's about the kind of environment that we're working in, not so much a tech question. So we want to start with people when we think about that. I think the other thing is, from a security risk perspective, if we all use technology the way our technology creators expected, then we'd have a lot less technology risk. But the reality is, people are just trying to get their job done, and they're going to use technologies in ways that we didn't anticipate. Again, a people problem. So we want to make sure, as security people, that we've got lots of training and awareness about how to do our jobs in the right, secure way according to that risk profile that's set by the organization.
I love it. So really it comes down to, the people and the security culture that will, make or break the success of those processes and that technology. Fantastic. Over to you, Andy, then. So in your book, 1% Leadership, you reference, celebrating victories is a way to, build relationships. I would love to hear from you. How can celebrating wins become a secret weapon to, application security leaders?
Yeah. So it is amazing to me in how many organizations nobody takes time to say, hey, we did a great thing. This is awesome. We used to do cake with the CEO. If we had told the CEO about a risk, your organization fixed it. When we briefed the CEO that this one was gone, we brought in cake, we brought in your team so that you got exposed in a public setting as somebody who cared about security and had done good work. And people would come to us and say, what do I need to do to get cake? Because we were the only organization that brought people in front of the senior executive team and said, we are safer and my job got easier because of this other organization. Like, this is how you build allies among the people that you need to, solve your technology and your process problems.
Love it. Yeah, it's an easy one, right? But yeah, let's pause, recognize, and celebrate.
Yep.
And moving us into a couple of the last questions now. According to recent Forrester research, 2025 is going to be the year for CISOs to get AppSec right. That's quite a statement. From your wealth of experience across your careers, what are you both seeing when it comes to the shifts that AppSec is undergoing right now? With your leadership hats on, and then what does that shift mean when it comes to application security posture management? What is the role that ASPM is playing in kind of the CISO's toolkit? Andy, we
So
can
I,
start
I
with you.
think yeah. So I think it's fascinating that Forrester thinks we're going to get it right this year. Let me just start with, like, I'm going to set a low bar. We are not getting it right this year, but maybe we'll get it more right. And I
Yeah.
think that there's two challenges fundamentally around application security. The first one, and I might get pilloried for this one, is it is actually not CISO's job. Application security is the job of the application developer. Our job is to help them do that. And the biggest challenge we have is almost no organization believes that. They believe that it's the security team's job to do AppSec. And so the security team is trying to force their way into a development organization that has been told it's not their job to do security. And so there's no priority there. That's, made worse by the fact that we have this fragmented ecosystem of a million AppSec tools that don't talk to each other, that are often highly technical, full of false positives, and we're trying to shove that down the throat of an organization that already doesn't want to do work for us. So they say, oh, you just sent me 1,000 problems. If I can find that one of them is a false positive, I can ignore all 1,000. And that's often the dynamic. They send you back to, vet through everything. The move to the idea of application security posture management is this idea to stop doing, individualized security at every stage of the development pipeline, and instead think of security as being embedded across the pipeline. What are the real problems? And at some point, how do we actually transition so that application development teams believe that the ASPM is their tool, not the CISO's tool?
I love that. Helen, any final thoughts from you on that one?
Yeah, ASPM enables an organization to change faster. So ASPM has a role to play coming up in 2025 and beyond, because the rate of change is accelerating, and you can't do that without the ASPM functionality and features that Andy just talked about. So, yeah, it- is it the year we get it right? Probably not, but I agree with Andy. We could get it better.
Yeah. I think that's what we should aspire to. Maybe not the year we get it right, but the year that we make at least a significant improvement. Well, that's probably it for today. We could have gone on for hours there, but a huge thank you to Helen and Andy for your time today and sharing, everything that you've learned across your incredible leadership experiences. I'm sure you have inspired a lot of people in our audience today to think about how to take on these lessons and your advice into their own leadership journeys. Lastly, I encourage everyone to put these books on their reading list. So please check out Helen's book, Navigating the Cybersecurity Career Path. Andy is pointing right on cue to his book, 1% Leadership. We've got a great demo in the background there. And of course, Psychode's book, Code Resilience in the Age of ASPM, where you'll be able to read Helen and Andy's chapters for much more insight beyond today's discussion. So again, lastly, thank you, Helen and Andy, once more. I'm handing back over to Shauna now, who will be taking us on to our next session. So don't go anywhere.